The rain was relentless that night, hammering the roof of our modest Virginia home like it wanted to break through. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the world blur into streaks of gray, my heart heavier than the storm outside. My son, Ethan, was out there somewhere, and I hadn't heard from him in hours. It was past midnight when the doorbell rang, sharp and jarring. I hurried to the door, my pulse racing, half expecting bad news. Instead, there stood Jamie, Ethan's best friend since middle school, soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his hazel eyes wide with something I couldn't quite read: fear, maybe, or desperation. "Mr. Callahan." Tu didn't know where else to go. Jamie stammered, his voice trembling as he clutched a duffel bag. "Ethan said I could crash here tonight. Is he home?" I hesitated. Ethan wasn't home, and I hadn't seen him since he stormed out after our fight that morning. But Jamie looked like he'd been through hell, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a fragility that tugged at something deep inside me. "Come in, Jamie," I said, stepping aside. "You're freezing. Let's get you dried off." The living room was warm, the kind of cozy that comes from years of family life-worn furniture, mismatched cushions, and a lingering scent of coffee. I handed Jamie a towel and a mug of tea, watching as he sat on the edge of the couch, his hands shaking slightly. At 20, he was no longer the gangly kid who used to raid my fridge with Ethan. He'd grown into himself, tall, lean, with a quiet intensity that made the air feel heavier. "Where's Ethan?" Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, sinking into the armchair across from him. "We had an argument this morning. He took off. Hasn't answered my calls." I paused, studying Jamie's face. "What's going on with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." He stared into his tea, his fingers tightening around the mug. "It's my dad," he said finally. "He found out about me, about who I am." His voice cracked, and he looked away, but not before I saw the tears welling in his eyes. I leaned forward, my chest tightening. "What do you mean, Jamie? What happened?" He took a shaky breath, and the story spilled out. Jamie had come out to his parents that evening, hoping for understanding. Instead, his father exploded, calling him names I won't repeat, throwing him out into the rain with nothing but a bag and a bruised heart. His mother had stood by silently, too afraid to intervene. Jamie had nowhere else to turn, so he came here, to the only place that ever felt like a second home. I listened, my anger at his father simmering beneath a wave of protectiveness. Jamie wasn't just Ethan's friend, was practically family. I'd watched him grow up, seen him and Ethan navigate the chaos of adolescence together, their laughter filling this house. But I'd never known this part of him, this secret he'd carried alone. "I'm so sorry, Jamie," I said, my voice thick. "You don't deserve that. You can stay here as long as you need." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but the weight of his pain lingered in the room. I wanted to say more, to fix it somehow, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I got up and grabbed a blanket from the closet, draping it over his shoulders. "Get some rest," I told him. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." As I turned to leave, Jamie's voice stopped me. "Mr. Callahan, thank you for not judging me." I looked back at him, his eyes searching mine for something acceptance. Maybe, or just a shred of hope. "You're safe here, Jamie," I said. "Always." I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach, thinking of Ethan out there in the storm, and Jamie, broken but brave, sleeping on my couch. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the next few days would unravel everything I thought I knew about my son, my life, and even myself. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick with humidity. I found Jamie in the kitchen, making coffee like he'd done 100 times before. He looked better, though his eyes were still shadowed with exhaustion. "Any word from Ethan?" he asked, pouring me a cup. "Not yet," I said, checking my phone for the 10th time. "He's probably at his girlfriend's place, cooling off. He'll come around." Jamie nodded, but there was something in his expression, a flicker of guilt, or maybe fear, that made me pause. Before I could ask, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "I'm fine. Be home soon. We need to talk." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When Ethan walked through the door an hour later, his face was a storm cloud, his eyes darting between me and Jamie. "What's he doing here?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Jamie needed a place to stay," I said, keeping my tone even. "His dad kicked him out last night." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked at Jamie with an intensity one didn't understand. "You told him?" he asked, his voice low. Jamie nodded, his cheeks flushing. "I had to. Ethan." "I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Ethan snapped, stepping closer. "Couldn't keep it together. Couldn't just deal with it." "Enough," I said, standing between them. "Ethan, what's going on with you? You disappear all night, and now you're acting like Jamie's the problem." Ethan's eyes flashed with something raw anger. Fear. Maybe both. "You wouldn't get it, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. He turned and stormed upstairs, slamming his bedroom door. I looked at Jamie, who was staring at the floor, his hands clenched. "What's he talking about, Jamie?" I asked, my voice softer now. He shook his head, his lips pressed tight. "It's not my place to say." The rest of the day was tense, the house filled with unspoken words. Ethan stayed in his room. Jamie kept to himself, and I was left trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't understand. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway, then hushed voices, Ethan and Jamie, talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the emotion in their voices was unmistakable: pain, fear, and something deeper, something that made my heart ache in a way I couldn't explain. By the time the sun rose the next day, I knew things were about to change. I just didn't know how much. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where I sat, nursing a cold cup of coffee. Ethan hadn't come down for breakfast, and Jamie was out on the back porch, staring at the overgrown yard like it held answers I couldn't see. The silence in the house was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. I couldn't shake the memory of their late-night conversation, the urgency in their voices. Something was wrong more than Ethan's usual teenage rebellion or Jamie's family drama. I'd raised Ethan alone since his mother left when he was 5, and I prided myself on knowing him better than anyone. But now, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Around noon, Ethan finally appeared, his hair disheveled, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat but resolute. He glanced toward the porch, where Jamie was still sitting, then back at me. Alone. We sat in the living room, the same room where Jamie had poured out his heart the night before. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I owe you an apology," he started, "for taking off yesterday. I needed space." "Space from what?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Ethan, you can't just disappear like that." I was worried sick. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about you and me fighting. It's about me." And Jamie? My stomach twisted. What about Jamie? Ethan took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the couch. I've been lying to you, Dad. To everyone. Jamie's not just my best friend. He's more than that. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile, like glass about to shatter. I stared at him, my mind racing to catch up. More than that. I repeated, my voice sounding distant even to myself. Ethan looked up, his eyes fierce with a mix of defiance and fear. I'm gay, Dad. And Jamie, he's my boyfriend. Time seemed to stop. The room, the house, the world outside Deed all faded, leaving just me and my son, his truth laid bare between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat was tight, my thoughts a jumble of shock, confusion, and something else, guilt. Maybe, for not seeing it sooner. Say something, Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. Please. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. How long have you known? I asked, my voice softer than I expected. Since high school, he said. But I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to look at me differently. Differently? I shook my head, my heart aching. Ethan, you're my son. Nothing changes that. Nothing. He blinked, tears spilling down his cheeks. And I realized how much he'd been carrying. How much he'd hidden to protect himself and maybe to protect me. I stood and pulled him into a hug, holding him tight as he sobbed into my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing him, really seeing him. When we finally pulled apart, Ethan wiped his eyes and glanced toward the porch. Jamie's been through a lot, he said. His dad, he didn't just kick him out. He hurt him. Dad. Badly. My blood ran cold. Hurt him how? Ethan hesitated, then told me everything. Jamie's father had always been strict. But when Jamie came out, it turned violent. A shove. A slap. Words that cut deeper than any bruise. Jamie had fled to our house, not just for shelter, but because he was scared for his life. We need to help him, Ethan said, his voice firm. He can't go back there. Of course he's staying here, I said without hesitation. But Ethan, why didn't you tell me about you two sooner? Why keep it a secret? He looked away, his jaw tight. Because I was scared. Not just of you, but everyone. This town. This place, it's not exactly welcoming to people like us. I thought of our small Virginia town, the church on every corner, the whispers that spread like wildfire. I'd always thought of it as home, but now I saw it through Ethan's eyes, a place where he felt he had to hide who he was. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. That afternoon, I found Jamie on the porch, his knees pulled to his chest. Ethan told me, I said, sitting beside him, about you two. Jamie's eyes widened, and he looked away, his hands fidgeting. I'm sorry we didn't tell you. I didn't want to mess things up. You didn't mess anything up, I said firmly. Your family, Jamie. And you're not going back to that house. You're staying here, with us. He looked at me, his eyes glistening. You mean that? I do, I said. And we're going to figure this out together. That night, the three of us sat down for dinner. The first time we'd all been together since Jamie arrived. It was awkward at first, the weight of everything unspoken hanging over us. But as we ate, something shifted. Ethan reached for Jamie's hand under the table, and Jamie smiled a real, unguarded smile that lit up the room. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope, but I also knew this was only the beginning. There were challenges ahead: Jamie's family, the town's judgment, and my own journey to understand the son I thought I knew. I didn't have all the answers, but I had them, and that was enough for now. The days that followed were a delicate dance of rebuilding trust. Ethan and Jamie settled into a cautious rhythm, their affection for each other now out in the open, at least within the walls of our home. I watched them closely, not out of suspicion, but because I was learning to see my son in a new light, and Jamie alongside him. One morning, I found them in the kitchen, laughing over burnt toast. Ethan was teasing Jamie about his cooking skills, and Jamie was firing back with a playful smirk. It was the kind of moment I'd taken for granted when they were kids, carefree, unguarded. But now, knowing what they'd both been through, it felt like a small miracle. Still, the outside world loomed large. Jamie's father had left voicemails, alternating between rage and cold demands for Jamie to come home and fix this. I deleted them before Jamie could hear, but the threat of his father hung over us like a storm cloud. Ethan, too, was on edge, checking his phone constantly for messages from friends who didn't know about him yet. "We need to talk about what's next," I said one evening, sitting them both down in the living room. "Jamie, you can't go back to your dad's. Not after what he did." Jamie nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I know, but I don't have anywhere else. My mom, she won't stand up to him." "What about legal options?" I asked. "You're 20. You can file for a restraining order. Or, no." Jamie cut in, his voice sharp. "I just want to move on. I don't want to drag this out in court." Ethan reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out," he said, looking at me. "Right, Dad?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure how. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a protector for both of them, navigating a world I barely understood. I spent that night researching, reading about safe havens for young adults, legal rights for domestic violence survivors, and support groups for LGBTQ youth. The more I read, the more I realized how much I'd been blind to not just about Ethan and Jamie, but about the challenges they faced in a world that wasn't always kind. The next day, I drove Jamie to pick up his things from his parents' house while his father was at work. Ethan insisted on coming, his jaw set with determination. The house was quiet when we arrived, a small brick rancher on the edge of town. Jamie's mother was home, her face pale and drawn as she let us in. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Jamie, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't know what to do." Jamie didn't respond, just moved quickly to his room, grabbing clothes, books, and a small box of keepsakes. Ethan stayed close, helping him pack, while I stood watch in the living room, half expecting Jamie's father to burst through the door. When we left, Jamie's mother hugged him, but he didn't hug her back. The drive home was silent, the weight of that goodbye pressing down on all of us. Back at the house, Jamie retreated to the guest room, saying he needed time alone. Ethan lingered in the kitchen, his hands shoved in his pockets. "He's not okay," he said quietly. "He acts tough, but he's not." "I know," I said, "but he's got us now. And you've got me." Ethan looked at me, his expression softening. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." That night, I overheard them talking again, their voices drifting through the thin walls. Jamie was crying, his words muffled but raw, and Ethan was comforting him, his voice steady and warm. I didn't eavesdrop, but I couldn't help catching fragments, promises to stick together, to build a life where they could be themselves. It struck me how brave they were, facing a world that could be cruel with nothing but each other and a stubborn kind of hope. The next morning, I found a flyer on the community board at the local coffee shop, a support group for LGBTQ youth, meeting weekly at a community center downtown. I brought it home and showed it to Jamie and Ethan, expecting resistance. To my surprise, they agreed to go, though Jamie looked nervous, his fingers twisting the edge of his shirt. The group was small but welcoming, held in a brightly lit room with mismatched chairs and a table of snacks. The facilitator, a woman named Sarah, had a warm smile and a knack for putting people at ease. Jamie and Ethan sat close together, listening as others shared their stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful. When it was Jamie's turn, he hesitated, then spoke about his father, his voice steady but soft. Ethan held his hand the whole time, and I felt a swell of pride for both of them. Driving home, Jamie seemed lighter, like a weight had lifted. That wasn't as bad as I thought, he admitted, a small smile breaking through. Ethan grinned. Told you. You're tougher than you think. As the days turned into weeks, our house became a sanctuary. Jamie officially moved in, taking over the guest room, and Ethan started opening up more, sharing stories of their relationship, how it started, the secret moments they'd stolen over the years. I learned to listen without judgment, to ask questions without prying. But the peace was fragile, and I knew it wouldn't last forever. Trouble was coming, I could feel it. Trouble arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, in the form of a loud knock at the door. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I heard I'd insistent, almost angry. My gut told me who it was before I even opened the door. Jamie's father, Robert, stood on the porch, his face red with fury, his fists clenched at his sides. "Where's my son?" he demanded, his voice booming. "I know he's here." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to keep him out of the house. "Jamie's not going anywhere with you," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "You need to leave." Robert's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, his breath reeking of stale beer. "You don't get to tell me what to do with my kid. He's coming home, whether he likes it or not." "He's not a kid anymore," I shot back. "He's 20, and he's made his choice. You laid hands on him, Robert. That's not something you get to take back." For a moment, I thought he might swing at me, his face twisted with rage. But before he could act, Ethan appeared in the doorway, Jamie behind him. "Dad, what's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. Robert's eyes locked onto Jamie, and he sneered. "You think you can just run away and play house with this freak?" He spat, gesturing at Ethan. "You're disgusting, both of you." Jamie flinched, but Ethan stepped forward, his hands balled into fists. "Don't talk about him like that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know anything about us." I put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, pulling him back. "Go inside," I told him. "Both of you. I'll handle this." Reluctantly, they retreated, though Ethan's eyes burned with defiance. I turned back to Robert, my own anger rising. "You're not welcome here," I said. "If you come back, I'm calling the police." Robert laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You think you can protect them? This town's not as open-minded as you think, Callahan. They'll learn that soon enough." He left, but his words lingered, a poison seeping into my thoughts. That night, I sat down with Ethan and Jamie, determined to make a plan. "We need to be proactive," I said. "A restraining order, maybe. Or we could look into moving somewhere safer." "Move." Ethan's eyes widened. "Dad, this is our home." "I know," I said, my heart heavy. "But Robert's not going to let this go. And he's right about one thing: this town isn't always kind to people who are different." Jamie looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said quietly. Maybe I should just leave. No, Ethan said fiercely, grabbing his hand. You're not going anywhere. We're in this together. I nodded, feeling a surge of pride for my son's strength. He's right. Jamie, you're not alone anymore. The next day, I contacted a lawyer friend, Karen, who specialized in family law. She agreed to help us file for a restraining order against Robert, and she connected us with a local organization that supported LGBTQ youth. They offered resources, housing options, counseling, even job placement for Jamie, who was determined to stand on his own feet. But the threat of Robert wasn't the only challenge. Word was spreading in our small town, as it always does. At the grocery store, I noticed people whispering, their eyes darting toward me. At work, a coworker asked, "Is it true about your son?" With a tone that made my skin crawl. I brushed it off, but the judgment was there, subtle but sharp. Ethan and Jamie felt it too. They stopped holding hands in public, their laughter quieter, their shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. It broke my heart to see them dimming their light to fit in. And I knew I had to do more than just protect them. I had to help them thrive. One evening, I found Ethan in the backyard, staring at the stars. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him on the grass. He sighed, his breath visible in the cool night air. I just want to be myself, Dad, without feeling like I'm doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, I said firmly. You love who you love. That's not a crime, it's a gift. He looked at me, his eyes searching. You really believe that? I do, I said, and I meant it. And I'm going to fight for you and Jamie to have the life you deserve. The next week, we attended another support group meeting. This time, Ethan spoke, sharing how hard it had been to hide who he was, how freeing it felt to be out, even if it came with fear. Jamie listened, his eyes shining with pride, and I realized how much they strengthened each other. They were young, but their love was fierce, a force that could weather any storm. Still, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Robert's threat echoed in my mind, and the town's judgment was a constant pressure. But as I watched Ethan and Jamie, I felt a resolve growing inside me. This wasn't just about them, Anna Marie, it was about me, too, and the kind of father I wanted to be. The restraining order came through a week later, a small piece of paper that felt like a lifeline. Karen, our lawyer, warned us it wasn't a guarantee Robert could still cause trouble, but it was a start. Jamie seemed to breathe easier, though I noticed he still jumped at loud noises, his eyes scanning the windows at night. Ethan, meanwhile, was grappling with his own battles. He'd decided to come out to his friends, a group of guys he'd known since high school. I braced myself for the fallout, knowing how cruel young men could be. To my relief, most of them were supportive, slapping him on the back and saying things like, "We got you, man." But one, a guy named Mike, didn't take it well. He stopped returning Ethan's texts, and when they ran into each other at the local diner, Mike made a crude comment that left Ethan shaken. I thought he was my friend, Ethan told me later, his voice thick with hurt. How do you just throw that away? I didn't have an answer, but I hugged him and promised we'd get through it. Jamie, who'd been listening from the doorway, joined us, his presence a quiet comfort. You don't need people like that, he said softly. You've got me. The support group became a lifeline for them both. They went every week, sometimes dragging me along. I listened to stories of rejection and resilience, of families torn apart and rebuilt. It opened my eyes to a world I'd never fully understood, one where love could be both a weapon and a shield. I started volunteering at the community center, helping with fundraisers and outreach, determined to make our town a safer place for Ethan and Jamie. But the tension in our house was building again. Robert had stopped calling, but we heard through the grapevine that he was spreading rumors, calling Jamie a disgrace and Ethan a bad influence. The whispers reached the school where I worked as a history teacher, and I started getting questions from colleagues polite, but pointed. Is everything okay at home, Tom? They'd ask, their eyes full of pity or worse, judgment. One afternoon, I came home to find Ethan and Jamie in a heated argument in the living room. You can't keep avoiding this, Ethan was saying, his voice rising. We need to deal with it. Jamie. Deal with what? Jamie shot back, his face flushed. You think I want to face him again? You didn't see what he did. I stepped in, my heart pounding. What's going on? Ethan turned to me, his eyes blazing. Jamie's dad showed up at the community center today. He didn't get in, but he was yelling, making a scene. Jamie won't talk about it. Jamie crossed his arms, his jaw tight. There's nothing to talk about. He's not worth it. He's your father, Ethan said. Softer now. You can't just pretend he doesn't exist. Watch me, Jamie snapped, storming out of the room. I looked at Ethan, who was rubbing his temples, frustration etched into his face. He's scared, Dad, but he won't admit it. I'll talk to him, I said, though I wasn't sure what I'd say. I found Jamie in the backyard, sitting on the old swing set we hadn't used in years. He looked small, curled in on himself, the weight of his past pressing down. Jamie, I said, sitting beside him. You don't have to face him alone. We're here. He didn't look at me, just swung gently, the chains creaking. I keep thinking he'll change, he said finally. But he won't. And I hate that it still hurts. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his frame. It's okay to hurt, but you don't have to carry it alone. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. I sat with him in silence, the swing swaying under us, until the sky turned pink with dusk. When we went back inside, Ethan was waiting, his eyes soft with worry. They hugged, a long, quiet embrace that said more than words could. The next day, I called Karen again, asking about next steps. She suggested a mediation session, a chance for Jamie to confront his father in a controlled environment. Jamie was hesitant, but Ethan convinced him, promising to be there every step of the way. I admired their strength, the way they leaned on each other, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before the storm. Sure enough, trouble came again, this time at my workplace. The principal called me into her office, her face grim. Tom, we've had complaints, she said. Some parents are concerned about your home situation. They're saying it's inappropriate, given your role here. I felt the blood drain from my face. My home situation. You mean my son and his boyfriend living with me? She shifted uncomfortably. I'm just relaying what I've heard. I support you. But the school board, they're under pressure. I left her office in a daze, anger and fear warring inside me. That night, I told Ethan and Jamie, expecting them to be as outraged as I was. Instead, they looked resigned, as if they'd been waiting for this. It's not your fault, Dad, Ethan said. It's just how things are. No, I said, slamming my hand on the table. It's not how things should be, and I'm not going to let this town tear us apart. The mediation session was set for a Friday morning, in a neutral office downtown with Karen overseeing the process. Jamie was a wreck leading up to it, barely eating, his eyes haunted. Ethan stayed by his side, whispering reassurances, but I could see the strain on both of them. I wanted to shield them from this, But I knew Jamie needed to face his father to move forward. The office was stark, with plain white walls and a long table that felt like a battle line. Robert sat across from us, his face a mask of barely contained anger. Jamie sat between me and Ethan, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Karen's calm voice set the ground less no shouting. No interruptions, but the air was thick with tension. Jamie, Karen began. Why don't you start? Tell your father what you need him to hear. Jamie took a shaky breath, his eyes fixed on the table. I just wanted you to accept me, he said, his voice low. I'm your son. I thought you'd love me no matter what. Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Karen nodded encouragingly, and Jamie continued, his voice growing stronger. You hurt me. Not just that night, but for years. You made me feel like I was wrong for being who I am. And I can't forgive you for that not yet. The room was silent, the weight of Jamie's words sinking in. Robert finally spoke, his voice cold. You chose this. You could have been normal, but you picked this lifestyle. Ethan's hand tightened on Jamie's, and I saw the hurt flash across Jamie's face. Before I could stop myself, I leaned forward. He didn't choose anything, I said, my voice sharp. He's your son, Robert. He's brave and kind and deserves better than you've given him. Robert's eyes narrowed, but Karen intervened, keeping the conversation on track. By the end, no one had apologized, but Jamie had said what he needed to. As we left, he looked lighter, like he'd shed a piece of the burden he'd carried for so long. Back home, life settled into a new normal. Jamie started working part-time at the community center, helping with youth programs, while Ethan took online college courses, determined to finish his degree. I kept teaching, ignoring the whispers at school, but the pressure from the school board didn't let up. They called me in again, this time with a formal warning, shape up, or we'll have to reconsider your position. I was furious, but I didn't tell Ethan or Jamie. They had enough to deal with. Instead, I started looking into jobs in bigger cities, Richmond, maybe, or D.C., where they could live more openly. The idea of leaving our home, the place where Ethan grew up, tore at me, but I knew it might be the best thing for them. One night, I found them on the couch, watching a movie, their heads close together. They looked so young, so in love, and I felt a pang of gratitude for the life we were building, despite everything. But that peace was shattered the next morning when I found a brick on our porch. A hateful slur scrawled across it in red paint. Ethan saw it first, his face paling. Jamie froze, his eyes wide with fear. I called the police, but they said there was little they could do without evidence. Probably just kids, the officer said, but I knew better. This was personal. That night, we sat down and made a decision. We couldn't stay in a place that hated them for who they were. I contacted a friend in Richmond who worked at a high school, and he said they were looking for a history teacher. It wasn't a done deal, but it was a start. As we packed up the house over the next few weeks, I watched Ethan and Jamie grow closer, their bond a quiet strength. They helped each other through the fear, the uncertainty, and I realized how much they'd changed me. I'd spent years thinking I was protecting Ethan, but they were teaching me what it meant to fight for love, to stand up against hate. The day we loaded the last box into the moving truck, Jamie paused, looking back at the house. This place saved me, he said softly. You saved me. I put an arm around him, my throat tight. You saved yourself, Jamie, and you've got a whole future ahead. Ethan joined us, his hand finding Jamie's. We've got this, he said, his voice steady. All of us. As we drove away, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a mix of grief and hope. We were leaving behind a home, but we were heading towards something better, a place where they could be themselves, where love could win. Richmond was a different world. The city buzzed with life, diverse, vibrant, and far more accepting than our small town. We moved into a modest apartment in a neighborhood full of young families and artists, where Ethan and Jamie could hold hands on the street without fear of a brick through the window. I got the teaching job at the high school, and for the first time in months, I felt like we could breathe. Jamie thrived in the city. He took a full-time job at a youth center, running art workshops for kids like him, kids who needed a safe space to be themselves. His confidence grew, his smile brighter than I'd ever seen. Ethan enrolled in a local college, studying psychology, determined to help others navigate the struggles he and Jamie had faced. They were building a life together, and I was proud to witness it. But the past wasn't done with us. One afternoon, I got a call from Karen. Robert had violated the restraining order, showing up at Jamie's old workplace, demanding to know where he was. The police had detained him, but he was out on bail, angrier than ever. Karen advised us to stay vigilant, and I saw the fear creep back into Jamie's eyes. "We can't let him ruin this," Ethan said that night, his voice fierce. "We've come too far." Jamie nodded, but I could see the doubt in his expression. I pulled him aside later, when Ethan was asleep. "You're not alone in this," I told him. "If he comes near you, he'll have to go through me." Jamie managed a small smile. "You're like the dad I never had," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you." Those words stayed with me, a reminder of why we'd fought so hard. I wasn't just protecting my son anymore, I was protecting Jamie, too, and the family we'd become. Life in Richmond wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, bills to pay, new routines to learn, the occasional sting of prejudice. But there were also moments of joy, Ethan and Jamie dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear. The three of us exploring the city's parks and cafes, building new memories. I started attending a parents' support group for families of LGBTQ kids, learning from others who'd walked this path. It helped me understand the mistakes I'd made, not seeing Ethan struggle sooner, not creating a space where he felt safe to be himself. One evening, Ethan came to me with a proposal. "We want to get married," he said, his eyes shining. "Not right now, but soon. We want to do it right. With you there." I was speechless, my heart swelling with pride and love. "I'd be honored," I said, pulling him into a hug. When Jamie joined us, I hugged him too, feeling like my family had grown in ways I'd never imagined. But the shadow of Robert lingered. A month later, he showed up in Richmond, tracking Jamie to the youth center. He didn't get far. The staff called the police, and he was arrested again, this time facing serious charges for violating the restraining order. Jamie was shaken, but he stood tall, testifying in court with Ethan by his side. Robert was sentenced to a year in jail, and for the first time, Jamie felt free. That night, we celebrated with dinner at a little Italian place downtown. Jamie raised a glass, his voice steady. "To new beginnings," he said, looking at Ethan, then at me, "and to family." We clinked glasses, the candlelight reflecting in their eyes, and I knew we'd made it through the worst. They were stronger than ever, and so was I. A year later, I stood in a small garden in Richmond, watching Ethan and Jamie exchange vows. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the flowers and the small crowd of friends and allies who'd become our extended family. Ethan looked handsome in a simple suit, his smile wide as he held Jamie's hands. Jamie, radiant with joy, spoke his vows with a clarity that brought tears to my eyes. "I promise to love you, to fight for you, to be your home," Jamie said, his voice steady. Ethan's eyes glistened as he echoed the words. Their love a beacon in a world that hadn't always been kind. I thought back to that rainy night when Jamie showed up at our door, broken and scared. I thought of the fights, the fear, the moments of doubt. And I thought of the strength we'd found together, the way we'd built a new life from the ashes of the old. As they kissed, the crowd cheered, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd spent so long worrying about protecting them. But they taught me something greater. Love doesn't just survive, it thrives, even in the face of hate. After the ceremony, we danced under string lights, the music mingling with laughter. Jamie's mother was there, tentative but trying to rebuild what she'd broken. She hugged Jamie, whispering apologies, and I saw him soften, a sign of healing. My own heart was full, not just for them, but for the man I'd becoming, a father who'd learned to listen, to fight, to love without conditions. Later, as the night wound down, Ethan found me by the garden's edge. Thanks, Dad, he said, his voice soft. For everything. I pulled him close, my throat tight. You made me better, Ethan. You and Jamie both. As they drove off into their future, I stood under the stars, grateful for the night that changed everything. It wasn't just their love that had transformed, might was the courage to stand by them, to choose family over fear. And in that choice, I found a life fuller than I'd ever imagined.